help the audience get to know you just a little bit more, I'd love it if each of you, in turn, could briefly tell us a little bit about your role and its mission, because I didn't say what that was, the scale of your organization, if you have any interesting stats on hand, and what kind of tech stack or data infrastructure you oversee. Let's start with you, Minerva.
Sure. So first, it's great to be here at AppNexus. It makes me really proud that this is a New York City startup, and it's fantastic. The startup scene in New York City is so awesome, and AppNexus is a huge part of it. So congratulations to AppNexus for being made in New York. um, and that is a lead into a lot of what I do. The first CTO of New York City, being the inaugural CTO, is really an incredible challenge and honor to define what is the role of technology in New York City government and government in general. And at a high level, the way we look at it is, I am responsible for developing a coordinated citywide tech strategy to help New York be the most tech-friendly and innovative city in the world. Piece of cake, right? Yeah. I think there's a couple different ways to look at it, and the goal is to make a 21st century government that's more deeply connected to its people. I mean, that's really what it's all about. It's about tech for the people of New York City. And, when you think about it, that's what drives me every day and why this has been like the best job and the hardest job I've ever had so far in my 30 years in tech. So one of the ways that we're doing this is we're rethinking how the structure of technology in the city is. So the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, sets the strategy and policy citywide across over 70 agencies. And the Department of IT and the CIO, they're the custodians of that strategy and policy. They own it, they make it happen. And then the agency CIOs are my customers. They come to me and say, we need, a strategy for cloud, or we need a strategy for open source. We'd like to coordinate that across the city, and that's a big part of what I do. Just to give you an idea of the scale of New York City, for those of you who aren't aware, if New York City were a country, we would be the 21st largest by GDP in the world. We would be the 21st largest country by GDP, New York City on its own. If we roll out anything for all city employees, that's 325,000 employees. New York City is the largest employer of New Yorkers with 325,000 employees. We have over 70 agencies. We just published our 2015-2016 budget. The budget is $77 billion. If you think about just one of the agencies that I help guide their strategy, the Department of Education, we have over 1 million school children in the New York City public school system. So just to give you an idea of the scale of our organization, we have a lot of different kinds of technology. I think, like any enterprise, we have a little of everything. But I think the other challenge is that we also have pretty much every industry there is inside the city of New York. So we have a logistics industry, we have a finance industry, we've got an employment industry. So it's really like every New York City government is like a microcosm of New York itself. So we have everything and we do everything.
Awesome. Lucille, how about you?
Well, Catherine, I think as you mentioned, so BNY Mellon is the oldest bank in the U.S. and is certainly one of the largest custodian of institutional assets. So really think about it. So Bank of New York is not going to have an ATM that you can go to and get your cash out. Our clients are institutions, governance, sovereigns, different types of mutual funds that custody with us. Overall, just to give you a sense of scale, every single day, about $5.9 trillion worth of activity passes through BNY Mellon. They say it's about 1/3 of all of the world's transactions go through our pipes. So when you think about it, we're really not a bank. We're a technology firm. There's no way you can process that sense of scale without having the right type of technology. We also are about 13,000 strong worldwide by way of developers, and with a very large contingent. There are 2 innovation centers in India. We also have an innovation center in Jersey City, and we also have one in Silicon Valley, and we're about to break ground on an innovation center in London. So lots of growth, lots of different diverse perspectives, and trying to bring that all forward. Like Minerva, we have a long legacy of lots of developed software and lots of different platforms. But we really have, in the past 2 years, really set our stage of our architectural focus. So largely, I guess, first of all, let me mention my role. I'm sorry, I didn't talk about that. I am the CIO of what's called Client Experience Delivery. So I have the responsibility for all of the client-facing technology for BNY Mellon, regardless of function, regardless of service. And that may include traditional browser or mobile-type access, and also all of the electronic-type interactions that we have with many financial services firms. And there are over 250 different types of these types of interactions that happen, whether they be portals or different types of electronic media. So coming from that perspective, I would say our tech stack is largely, we're building a lot in AngularJS, certainly with HTML5 for responsive design and CSS. Our cloud infrastructure is largely Apache and Spring. We're an Oracle shop. That's both on the legacy side and the new side. We definitely have a decision science discipline as well. We're using Vertica for our relational database design, and we're also using Hadoop for the non-relational relation side. Lots of change going on. We definitely have a commitment to open source as well as to agile and continuous integration of our environment, which again is a very big paradigm shift from the traditional types of banks. And all of this change is really going on all at the same time when there's lots of regulation and lots of other issues going on in the financial services firm. So it's very exciting, God knows.
Awesome.
All right. I'm a little easier to contain in fewer sentences because my company is much smaller. The only biggest claim to fame I think Runway has is that we are the country's largest dry cleaner, possibly the world's largest dry cleaner, in our warehouse in Secaucus, New Jersey.
Yeah.
I was just out there yesterday. It is really a thing to see. I got a great scaling metaphor involving the old steam valves that we used to have in our old warehouse. We just moved about 5 months ago. We had these old steam valves, and they cost like $70. You could go to the warehouse or the hardware store and get them. And our head of operations is telling me, yeah, so we used to have these $7 steam valves, and when we were building out the new boilers, we realized that we have to buy these $1,600 like massive wheel-based steam valves. And I was like, man, I'm going to use that in a talk someday to talk about scaling and how it's not always linear. Because, man, $70 to $1,600 is not linear. So anyway, I'm the CTO for Rent the Runway, which means I own technology strategy and execution to a lesser extent, but really thinking about how do we take the business that Rent the Runway is, which is renting designer dresses and accessories, making luxury available. We target women right now. So we have 2 products, short-term event-based rentals, and we also have a luxury subscription service. So how do we think about technology in ways that both it can grow the business in the future? So what technology innovations can we come up with to actually grow the business and create new opportunities, as well as how do we architect our systems to enable the most possible futures for the business? So we have so many ideas. The fun thing about being at a startup is that you've just got a million ideas. It's very greenfield. You're constantly iterating, changing, moving here, moving there. How do you create a technology platform where your developers are not going completely nuts, chasing this idea, then chasing that idea, then chasing this one, and you actually have a solid ground beneath you so that you can iterate and experiment and build and throw things away, always feeling like you're moving forward from a technology perspective. I think that's answered your question, yes? What? Oh, tech stack. Yes, yes, yes. Of course, the tech stack. Everyone wants to know what your stack is. It's so interesting. I'm a very boring person. I believe in boring technology. We use Java. I know, terribly boring. I'm sorry. We are actually members of the Drop Wizard community. We help support that community. So we use Java services. Technically, apparently, we are microservices, whatever the hell that means. I don't know. You guys can teach me later. I built the architecture, and I still don't know what that means. But we are a Java services, technically microservices. If you look at that definition, we use MySQL. We use Mongo for non-transactional document store. We use a little bit of Redis here, a little bit of Memcache there. Obviously, we have a thin Ruby client that serves our website, with some JavaScript of various sorts, Backbone and React, and who the hell knows, because JavaScript frameworks are changing all the time. And of course, we have an iOS app. We use RabbitMQ for messaging, and I think our data science team and our analytics team uses Vertica for data warehousing. And that's most of it. I'm sure there's a few things here and there, but actually pretty small considering we're a startup. Most startups have like way more different tech things.
I'm impressed that you managed to actually list them all.
Well, that's,
okay, Minerva, now you list it. No. All right, great. Well, thank you. I think by now everyone has a sense of who these leaders are and what it is that they preside over. Okay, so our first theme for tonight is communication, and let's start with a quick poll. Who here considers her or himself a technologist? Raise your hand. You have to raise your hand, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Who considers yourself not a technologist, non-technical? Okay. Great. Okay. It's a good mix. Okay, so let's talk about language. Now, I don't mean programming language. Who here has ever felt like you were speaking a different language when talking to a member of the other group? Yeah? Okay. Great. Yeah. So I have as well. Data science, we actually speak a third language. Data science doesn't always speak the same as engineering or business. But anyway, that's aside. Lucille, let's start with you. How important do you think it is that members in your organization be bilingual and speak both business and tech? How far down in the organization do you need to go where that is important?
Right. You're really lobbing me a softball here because this is right in my wheelhouse, mainly because of the client-facing nature of my responsibilities. So if I don't instill a culture where we can understand truly from a business point of view what our clients need and make sure that we're building technology towards fulfilling those needs, we're nowhere. Which again is a bit of a paradigm shift from the historic way we used to build technology. That's completely shifting around now under my leadership. But what's very important, how do you apply, we're all engineers, or a lot of us in technology are engineers. How do you apply an engineering discipline to be able to start to map out what are the various services that the businesses have to varying degrees of detail? So, and actually, I'm looking, there's a couple of guys in the room that actually work on, we have and part of my group is an entire business architecture group. And what we've done is mapped across all of BNY Mellon, again, across all the products and services, how do we start to create diagrams, engineering diagrams, to talk about it from a business point of view. Now, why are these important? First of all, I'm just generally visual. I like everything. Somebody comes and tells me a problem, I'm like, throw it on the board. Right? But these visualizations can actually be things that business and technology folks can actually collaborate upon. So we're trying to explain a new problem. What services does that problem affect? How are we going to take already existing services and cobble them together for new solutions? These diagrams become kind of the lifeblood of that conversation. Now, another thing we're doing is, again, taking now the view of the client. we take these very same services and we reassemble them by the different client market segments that we have. So instead of having a BNY Mellon view out, it starts to be a client view in. Now, some of those things may be BNY Mellon services. Some of them may be nothing that BNY Mellon does, but things that our clients need to do. So again, taking the purview now of building technology for them, they think they have things they do with us, plus other things. How do you start to connect the dots? How do you start to build technology to make them more efficient? Because we really have a view of where their overall responsibilities and needs are, and building those technologies to make that come together more efficiently with them. So I like to say that I'm part of my role as an evangelist of this concept. And all across BNY Mellon, in the various business lines, we're taking this business architecture and starting to have conversations. And it's our way of bringing the business a little closer to the way technologies see things as engineers, but it's also instilling in the technologists the language, the process views from the business. And it's kind of bringing that all together. And so far, it's going very well. Now, BNY Mellon overall is a firm of 55,000 people worldwide. So it's going to take us a while to get the evangelism out there, but it's going very well so far. And I think over time, it'll help us be more nimble because we'll all be talking in the same language.
So I thought you might say that, the bilingualness is necessary down to a point, but at some point you have engineers who just don't need to know. But that's not what I'm hearing. You're saying all the way down.
No. What I've generally found is when we take engineers and we don't explain to them, I'm big about context, right? So here you're trying to either automate a process or come up with a solution. You need to know the context of what's around that. And that's part of what we're really trying to re-educate our engineers about is don't just look at the problem itself. Look at it in the context of what the dependencies are around it. That's how we're really going to build great solutions. Make sense?
Yeah. Great. Now, Camille, I know this is a theme that's also close to you. You've written on your blog that if the CTO, specifically about the CTO, if the CTO does not have a seat at the executive table and does not understand the business challenges that the company is facing, that there's no way that he or she can guide the technology to solve this problem. So I'm interested in hearing from you about your specific transition from technologist to tech leader and what that entailed and what new skills and insights you had to learn along the way.
Sure. So, when I worked for Goldman, we called this commercial. Are you commercial or not? Did they say that at the other financials? Yeah, I figured. Actually, though, it was that kind of thing where the minute that I started working for Goldman and they started saying that, I was like, yeah, I get that. Understanding what the business is about, where I had worked in tech companies where it's all about technology, and I was actually missing that context. And so I've always been interested in understanding the context in which I'm building my software. It's always been something that's been really interesting to me. But I think that there are a lot of people that think, maybe not a lot, but there's certainly a theme running through a certain part of the technology industry right now where the CTO is like the best engineer. There's this idea that the CTO is the best engineer, which is not true pretty much ever at all. I was actually on Twitter yesterday. One of my friends tweeted that she wanted to create a Tumblr that had code snippets on it, and it was called CTO or intern. And you would just, post code snippets and be like, was it written by the CTO or was it written by an intern? And, yeah, because you know what? Like, CTO's job is not really writing code. Maybe if you're talking about a 10-person startup where the CTO is the co-founder and everyone's doing everything all the time. But, do I write code? Very occasionally. Yes, I do. Do I write code for production? Only accidentally. That happened about 6 months ago. It was an accident. Fortunately, it all turned out well. The job of a CTO is to be thinking about the technology strategy, to be thinking about the technology in the context of the business and bridging that gap with the technology team, bridging that gap with other peers on the business side of the organization, and just creating an organization where, technology has that seat at the table, where technology is driving the business. And, again, as I said in my intro, like creating those possible futures, enabling those possible futures for the business. And it's not really a role about like caring about the nitty-gritty details about how are we plumbing this thing into RabbitMQ, and is it, what if we don't have back pressure enabled? Oh my God, the services are going to die. And it's like, that stuff is fun, and actually I really like doing it, but that's a secondary part of my job. That part of the job is really for my team to do, right? They've got to get in those details, think about the software, thinking about the technologies, make the best decisions there. And I've got to think more about like the high level. Where are we going in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? How do my engineers know where we're going from a technology perspective so that as they're implementing all of these amazing product ideas that we have coming up, oh, we want to add this new type of thing to rent, oh, we want to add this new type of product, that they're constantly thinking about, okay, I know this product idea, but I also know that the vision of Rent the Runway's technology is moving in this direction, because as long as we're moving in this direction, the team will scale better, the technology will scale better, we'll be able to do more interesting things in the future. So, you know, I guess it's very similar really to what Lucille has been saying, right? Understanding the context at a very high level, being able to communicate that context very well to whomever you are communicating with, I think is such an important part of being a CTO. And it's something that doesn't get discussed as much as I would personally like it to. Because frankly, if CTO doesn't actually have a seat at the table, if the CTO is in the corner writing code, then other people are making the decisions for the business, not the engineering side. The engineering side has no voice, and that's actually a pretty weak position for us to put ourselves in. So,
to the point, Camille, though, wouldn't you also say when you have a seat at the table, the CTO is also listening to what the technology trends that are going on that may have nothing to do with your industry and how applicable that is to where
absolutely, of course,
goes, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, totally. Yeah.
We will get to innovation a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. So to hear both of you talk about it, it sounds like you both regard your role as being somebody who bridges that gap and pushes that communication layer down and throughout your organization because you regard it as being so critical, right? So Minerva, your turn, with your broad constituency and all these different agencies that you have to work with, I mean, what kinds of communication issues do you encounter? They must be of a slightly different flavor than Camille and Lucille encounter, or are they?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when you talk about the path, I mean, I did start out as an artificial intelligence developer. I was writing in Lisp, and my startup was an AI startup in 1985. And I think that sort of coding background eventually, you know, moving up to sort of system designer, and then and then going from system designer to then the system architect, and then realizing that I actually wanted to be an architect, pick up, business architecture, data architecture, infrastructure architecture, and then became a CTO. And so I sort of planned out all these domains, but the real reason I think is that I was asking so many questions, was such a pain in the butt that they kept like moving me to a different architecture. And so eventually, I got my very first CTO job, interestingly, at an advertising agency in 1997. And things were happening right around then, and it was sort of the same idea of like, well, now there's this internet thing. It's the mid 90s. How's that going to, it was still like kind of like Mad Men at the time, in the early 90s, and so what was going to be the impact of, the internet on advertising? And so that was really, really key to translating sort of the model and how the model of advertising itself is going to change, and translating that to technology back then around banner ads and being able to track who clicked on what and stuff like that. Fast forward to now, where basically, I mean, my office is in City Hall. The building has got elected officials and politicians and government officials in it, and one techie. And it's really been fascinating because I try to think about how technology has disrupted all these other industries I've been in. And I was, senior product manager at Palm right around the dawn of the mobile stuff was happening. And so how each industry has been transformed. And I started to think about government as the next industry to be disrupted and transformed and made customer-centric and made responsive through technology and made more efficient and effective through technology. So with that hat on, I think I've been able to be the translator between, why is this technology important to the people of New York? How is this technology going to make a more equal society? How is this democratizing everyone's voice? And so that is my job, every minute of every day is to translate technology trends to how they impact the lives of everyday New Yorkers. And that's been tremendously helpful. And then when I turn and face, our engineers, I can still do code reviews and say, why did you use that stack, and how come wasn't MongoDB, and why aren't we on Drupal, and all this other stuff. But I accidentally said Drupal in a meeting with some lawyers the other day, and they were like, what are she talking about? But most of the time I remember who I'm talking to, and I switch languages. So I think that's kind of the way that we're trying to cross-educate both the technologists and the impact of what they do, and the elected officials, and how they can use technology to further, our goals to equalize society.
So in all of these cases, it sounds like each of you learned another language, the language of business strategy, or the language of business strategy, or the language of elected officials and how to achieve their ends, and then became translators. Awesome. All right. So shifting just a tiny bit then, Camille, can you share any examples of when that communication went awry?
Yes. So everything about an organization is communication. I think the more that I do this job and the bigger that my company gets, and I get to see this firsthand, it's like when communication, you underestimate how much communication is important. I talk to people from companies of all different sizes, and like at some point there's a certain level of like seniority that you talk to a person, they're just like, I just don't understand why this decision was made. Doesn't matter what company it is. I'm sure every single person in this room has probably had that experience. I don't understand why this decision was made. Why are we doing this? What's going on? I feel like I don't get it, right? So communication is always really hard. But then you can add on the challenge of bad working relationships to make it much worse. So when I first started at Rent the Runway, we were really kind of rebuilding tech at Rent the Runway. So the founders had founded the company. They are, amazing, brilliant women. They are not engineers. And they didn't really realize the scope of the technology that they would need to create a really successful product. So they kind of thought, well, maybe we can outsource it. Okay, maybe we can just have like a couple of developers. We just need a website up, right? Well, again, we have the largest dry cleaner in the United States. You can imagine there's a lot more than just a website behind Rent the Runway. And so for a long time, the relationship was actually not very good. So there was sort of the tech team versus the business. And, requirements would sort of get thrown over the wall to the tech team, and they would try to implement something, and inevitably it would not be perfect, and there would be just these disagreements. And the team had sort of turned really into this very much us versus them attitude, and it was actually really kind of unhealthy. It meant that like there was a lot of unhappiness and a lot of mistrust around the organization. So even when things were communicated well, and by the way, they were not always communicated well. I mean, there were times when like you would have a developer sitting there and someone standing over their shoulder being like, no, this, no, that. And that's not a healthy communication either, right? So there was no trust from either side, and it made for an unhealthy company in a lot of ways. So a lot of what I had to do in my first really year and a half at Rent the Runway was, how do we make it us? How do we get away from this us versus them, the business versus technology, and just be like, look, we're us. We're all one Rent the Runway. We're all one company. We've got to make this work as a company. And I think that, that was really important to me because, frankly, sometimes this happens a lot in finance. In my experience was like, tech is treated as a cost center. It's just like, why do we have so many engineers? That can be really demoralizing to work in. And frankly, that was not what I wanted to be in. I wanted to be in us. So, I think that communication, it's not just about who knows what information, but how do you view the relationships between people in different roles on different teams? And fixing that is really important. And it's actually a pretty common thing for like startups, I think, of a certain size need to go through.
I think I can build upon your story because honestly, it is what happens in finance. God knows. So, just to go back to my bio. So, as Catherine mentioned, I was part of a firm called Pershing, and I was actually the CIO there first when BNY Mellon acquired us. I've only been in this current role, responsible for client experience delivery overall, for about 2 years now. And the bottom line is coming over from Pershing to the institutional side of the house was like going to a new firm. And to me, in Pershing, there was much more of a balance, much to your point in your blog about having a seat at the table. The CIOs, and there was two CIOs there, we actually were part of the business executive committee. We had an equal seat at the table and an equal voice. We were making business decisions as well as technology decisions. Going to BNY Mellon, it was very interesting to see quite the opposite. The business was king. Technologists were almost subservient to them, to their, they were actually telling them how to build systems. And when they came to the point where I would say is good technology hygiene needed to go on, that was always later because we had this to do or we had this to do. So when myself and the team, my team of peers, right, they were all divisional CIOs and our corporate CIO, came into place, we've inherited a lot of technology debt because there wasn't this balance and this negotiation and treating that the technology needs care and feeding as well. And so for the past 2 years, there's been an amazing amount of, and it's really because of a strong discipline and management conviction to bringing our technology up to speed to where it needed to be. I mean, our whole entire cloud infrastructure has been repositioned to be this scalable position as a service. Platform as a service type model, really with strong discipline. So a lot of that work we had to go do that really should have been done over the years, and now we're in a much better place. But that's been painful, and that's why really now this is the first year now where we're going to start coming out with new stuff, because now we've kind of got our house back in order. It's under control. And how can we now start to build more innovative solutions that the industry really needs? And so, to me, thinking back, that was a breakdown in communication. That was a breakdown in negotiation. I feel for the predecessors, how they could have been put into that position, but that's certainly not a healthy type of organization. It's much better now.
Yeah, that's a theme that those AppNexians in the room are probably familiar with. In our recent reorganization, puts product and engineers in the same organizations, and so we actually have unified backlogs of work where everybody agrees on what work we're going to do and we do it together. And I think that's trying to address that same point. So, hey, AppNexus, we're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So moving now to thinking less about communication, more about just the growth aspect of things. Let's think first about the technology side. So Lucille, I mean, we've spoken a little bit about the scale and some of your tech already, but I'd love to hear from you what are 2 or 3 of the biggest challenges that you face in the scale of your technology today and how you're approaching them.
Okay. A couple of things. One is certainly the need for talent, right? Because 13,000 people has to be the 13,000 of the right people. And of course, a lot of this whole upheaval we've had over the past 2 years really makes us look at the technology capabilities of many of the people we have. And that's been a lot of work. And a lot of us building out these innovation centers, building out in Silicon Valley. You know, to be a 230-year-old bank in Silicon Valley doesn't quite sound right, but we're doing it. And it's interesting to watch the people that are now starting to rethink the idea of either the big technology firm or the startup that went bust. And they've come and they actually are looking for these different types of alternatives. So we're actually hiring some talent out there, bringing a diverse point of view of how to solve problems. So that's the first piece. The second piece, I think, is making us more scalable. And a lot of that has to do with changing our architecture. So some of the big investments we've been making is extracting services from our legacy technology, compartmentalizing them, and making them RESTful API enabled. Creating building blocks as opposed to these monolithic systems so that we have these extracted and can use them in many different ways. I like to say it's like the building block mentality. Here's a new solution. What kind of building blocks do we have? What can we reuse? What do we have to incrementally build? put that together, that's your new solution.
Yeah.
Getting that kind of mindset has been challenging, and doing that hard work of pulling out the value from the legacy applications is a long, hard climb. We're not done with that yet, but we're making good strides. The last piece is breaking down some paradigms and approach of how we do things. You know, new exponential type organizations don't have to build everything on their own. So the whole idea of group sourcing, the whole idea of deciding what services we want to be in the building in, or how do we partner with other types of solutions. If any of you have heard of Symphony, Symphony is a consortium of many of the financial services firms to build collaboration type model, of which we're a major investor in that, as many of the major financial services firms are. We're actually group sourcing how to build a solution so that we can all deal with it. And initial states will be used mainly for instant messaging, but it really has the tons of potential to really take it to a whole new way that we communicate across the industry. So deciding what we need to build there, what's our common core, and what else we can partner with, that's the way we're really going to be able to scale.
So modularity and new ways of thinking about actually developing that business. Now, Camille, I think it's a little different when you're talking about growth at Lucille scale from when you're talking about growth from 10 to, say, 60 people in your technology org. Can you speak a little bit about how you think about scaling your team for success?
Sure. So I think one of the interesting things about scaling a startup is that you inevitably build something kind of crappy to begin with, and then you build something slightly less crappy the second iteration, and then you build something slightly less crappy again. You're sort of in this constant process of like just trying to make it a little bit better over time and over time. But what I'm engaged in right now, actually, over the past 6 months, I had a lot of time to think about like, all right, so we did this, what I call quote unquote microservices architecture, right? So we were actually on Drupal, not a good platform for what I was doing, good platform for a lot of things. And we knew that we had to get out of Drupal so we could actually build features. So we did this really actually pretty good scramble to extract components, put them into RESTful services, and link them up eventually to a Ruby API, Ruby sort of thin client, show them to our customers. Great. Now we have sort of service spaghetti. So we've got lots of services, fortunately no cyclical graphs. And we have lots of services though, and they're all doing different things, and the front end is calling directly to lots of different ones, and it's a little bit of a mess. So it's services, it's very scalable, but it's a little bit of a mess. Now, fine. The challenge there is actually that you can't really scale an organization when you have that level of a mess in your services. You actually have to clean up your architectural mess so that you can actually scale your organization. So we're actually moving to a model where we still will have services, but we're going to have a couple of different API layers that are really controlling how the main parts talk to each other. And then you can have services that have specialized functionality that are called by those API layers, but there's a fairly well delineated, sets of ownership between, for example, things that control and manage our inventory, the ROI of our inventory, the arbitrage opportunities of showing different inventory to people, versus the users layer, the personalization layer, the stuff that actually shows beautiful things to our customers on our website or our app. So doing that separation, doing that architectural separation, a lot of members of my team were like, okay, I guess this makes sense, but like, why would we waste our time doing this? And I'm like, because we're not going to scale as a tech team if we can't separate this stuff out and stop stepping on each other's toes and stop having to change this and 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 this for every single thing, and losing, having that sort of dispersed ownership of so many different little pieces of code. So I think a lot of scaling, even when you're trying to scale an organization, often you actually have to change your architecture if you want to scale that organization. And that's been, it seems obvious in retrospect, but certainly it was not entirely obvious when I went into the exercise.
Yep. The two are just completely intertwined, both the architecture and the people, so you can go horizontal. So Minerva, for you, there's not one monolithic tech stack that you need to scale and make modular. You have, and I believe I actually found this in print, you have the challenge, you're required, I believe, to scale the culture of innovation, technology, friendliness within the whole city. So talk about scaling, right? How do you even think about that challenge of scaling that culture?
Yeah, I think, I sort of borrow a lot of the lessons I learned from software design and kind of bring it to organization design. So, when you talk about good design, it's like decoupled, modular, interoperable, don't try to boil the ocean. So I think the idea that you can kind of set a single standard for all of New York City is kind of silly, right? And so, the approach to sort of breaking down the silos has been much more about connecting the dots. So one of my really fun jobs is to find those pockets of innovation in areas of the city and then connect them and find those common patterns and say, hey, you have a fleet of cars and you have a fleet of cars. Maybe we should, map our geospatial coordinates in the same way so that we can feed that data over to the open data portal and you can have a kind of cool layered map where everything actually aligns, So that's a big part of what I do. And people find this really, pretty cool. So we're inside government, we're promoting the concept that finding those pockets of innovation. The other piece is bringing the creativity and innovation from outside government in. So this is encouraging incubators, innovators, doing a lot of really interesting requests for, we're putting out soon various requests for innovation, requests for proposals, and saying, hey people, we've got this problem, maybe you can help us solve it, and we'll take the best proposal and then run with it. A perfect example of this is Link NYC. I don't know if you guys heard, but we put out an RFP that said we need to know what we can do with these really old payphones. When's the last time anybody used an actual payphone?
They may not know what it is.
Right. Well, I'm sure that 15 years ago when they did this franchise, they thought this was like really cool. Wow, there's this, you can just put a quarter in and make a phone call. It's awesome, right? But then, these payphone franchises were running out, and we put out this RFP that said, we think the best idea, we'll take the best idea of what to do with these payphones that people really like use it to put their gum in or hide from the cops or, when it's raining, right? And they never work. But they were actually generating revenue because of the advertising around them. That's how they make money. That's why they're still there, right? So we put out this RFP and we got, some great responses. The winner was announced last December. It's a consortium called City Bridge. And starting this year, by the end of the year, we're going to take all the payphones and turn them into free Wi-Fi hotspots. They'll be at a minimum of 100 megs, and we'll go up to a gigabyte in some of these locations. And so we announced the winner. Then it went through a whole bunch of government approvals and everything, and we'll probably have some prototypes available in late spring, early summer. But basically, these are going to be these kiosks with digital advertising on the side. It's going to have a tablet embedded in it where you can make a free phone call anywhere in the United States. And within 150 feet, you can just log on. It's Hotspot 2.0, security. You'll have access to free Wi-Fi.
Awesome. Digital advertising, you say?
And the best part is, then there's a button for 911, 311. So they're going to be like, free phones on steroids. And we see this as a really great opportunity for like hyper-local ads, for businesses, smaller businesses to buy micro ads, that's buy a sandwich 20 feet this way, kind of thing. And, with some of these having gigabit speeds, we think that that's going to be a huge change in the model for it. So this is like one of the big innovative things we've done in the city so far. Just two others real quick. One is .nyc. So New York City is one of the first. We're kind of in a fight with Las Vegas, but the first top-level domain that is belongs to the city of New York. So if you want to register Minerva.nyc, you can do that, but you have to be physically a resident of New York City. So we opened up this new top-level domain so that small businesses could sign up the domain name maybe they couldn't get in the .com, TLD.
My tech team got dresscode.nyc. We're very happy about that.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
the name
thanks.
of our tech blog, Dress Code.
Cool, cool. And then finally, we did a joint project, so public-private kind of thing with Gust and IBM, and we created digital.nyc. It's the one-stop shop for all things tech in New York City. So I just checked it the other day. There were over 6,500 startups listed, 800 VCs 800 events, and I think 300 VCs listed in New York City. So that's going to be, the place for anybody to go to check out the tech scene in New York. So, this is in addition to sort of breaking down silos and doing refactoring of old legacy systems, I also get to do this cool stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. So 2 points then. Number one, I think it's interesting. I understand where both of you guys are coming from, and I'm sort of combining Lucille and Camille here, that for you, scale is about breaking down so that you can modularize, so that you can extend horizontally. But for Minerva, scale is about connecting dots and creating that deeply connected graph. So that's interesting.
But I think, Catherine, that also by breaking down, you understand where you have redundancy, right? And that's where you start to make the connections as well. So
Right.
we're kind of doing the same thing too.
Yeah, all connected together. And the second point is that I think it's interesting that just in your answer here, Minerva, you went immediately from scale and growth to innovation, which is, of course, our last topic here, and already anticipated some of the questions that I was, in fact, about to ask you. But, so...
I read your mind.
Oh, how'd you do that? Once you're CTO of City of New York, you get superpowers, apparently. How are we doing on time? Okay. Well, so then briefly here at the end, I'd love to talk about innovation and how each of you three leaders thinks about it. So Minerva, I was going to ask you about some of the exciting trends in New York City recently, which you've already told us about. But I do have one, if you can, since we're a little low on time, briefly comment about just at a higher level, how do you think about when you're looking at these trends that kind of come, which ones are fads and which ones are actually going to be critical? Which ones do you know to pay attention to? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we have a hierarchy that we use to prioritize, because it's never tech for tech's sake. It would be the way we would look at it is how does it help advance our notion that we can use technology to help solve some of the biggest problems. So, so if it's a trend that potentially has an answer to, if you had all the technology in the world, how could you prevent homelessness? If you had all the technology in the world, how could you teach every kid in New York City computer science? And so if it fits one of those, that trend fits one of those, then we'll look at it. But if it's just the next bright shiny new thing, we'll probably set it aside until we'll put it in our toolbox until it appears as solving one of our problems.
So you're always thinking about the outcomes and how to apply.
Exactly.
Okay, Lucille, how about you? From your perspective as a leader within a large enterprise, is it important for you to stay on top of these trends, or can you mostly just ignore them?
No, actually, I think we definitely try to stay on top of that. And again, that's part of the diversity in our workforce now is how we're getting really firsthand knowledge from different geographic areas about what's going on. So one piece is certainly our strategy, as I mentioned before, is not to build everything ourselves. So we're looking very closely to partner with the right types of firms that are bringing new technology solutions to bear. We're hearing about them from our clients in many cases. And so our new technology platform really contemplates the idea of BNY Mellon services, non-BNY Mellon services, data interoperability between those services as the way we need to go for our future, to become the platform that our clients and the industry can build upon. Second piece, certainly, let's just take an example, something like Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's out there, the whole idea of digital currency is a trend that's happening that we have to pay strong attention to. To be honest with you, we've investigated the technology, the whole idea of the supply chain management, and the idea that it could disintermediate the centralized ledger, that whole paradigm. So we're paying close attention. We actually are running something, an innovation program, we're calling it like BK currency. We're trying to actually build in-house what the whole supply chain management would look like. So it's because we need to understand. Now, Bitcoin as a whole, I understand what, the regulators are starting to look at it now, which they should. It's people's, it's a value, right? And so we have to make sure that the public is protected. So whether it's Bitcoin or the son of Bitcoin at some point, I think something will happen. we know as an organization that we have to stay on the pulse of that and kind of anticipate what that's going to mean to us and be ready to respond to it. So it's not like we're pushing away. It's not like we're ignoring it. We're trying to see how we need to embrace that for the future.
Speaking of Bitcoin, just as an aside, it's hitting city government, right? What were you saying before?
Yeah, well, I mean, we try and look at all the trends, in particular, the peer-to-peer model of a lot of different stuff, and it just came up in the city council, a question that we're looking at about, whether we should start accepting Bitcoin to pay for your fees and fines, like your parking tickets. So, this is sort of just another day in the life of, hey, Minerva,
I love Minerva's job. It's so diverse. Telephones and now,
right.
parking meters.
Yeah.
It's great.
Awesome. Okay, Camille, what are the current trends in disruptive technologies and technology movements that excite you the most?
So I'm going to anti-answer this question, which is I'm going to say the thing that annoys me the most right now, which is apps. What the hell are we letting big tech companies do to us? Like, we figured out how to deploy software and build software really iteratively, really quickly. It's finally getting everywhere. We're getting it in the financial, just like we finally figured out how to deploy and develop software super, super quickly. And now we've got these intermediaries in Apple and Google saying, oh, actually, can you shrink wrap that for us and put it in our app store? And I find the whole app trend infuriating personally, because I find the whole trend of continuous delivery and the ways in which we can be constantly building, tweaking, and learning from our software to be so exciting. It is the most exciting thing in my experience as an engineer is building and tweaking and learning constantly. I just think that, I love doing that. I think engineers love seeing the results of their efforts really, really quickly. And it's so disheartening to me that for whatever reason, we've decided to put these people in between bits and our usage of bits. That's not to say I don't have a smartphone with many apps on it, but it is a trend that just annoys me. And I'm really interested in seeing the clever ways that engineers figure out to work around it. I'm sure there are many already. But it's frustrating to me that we're having to figure out how to work around basically what, we rebelled against and built away from in the web, which is that shrink wrap software mentality, that waterfall delivery date based, oh my gosh, I've got to have the release candidate and I've handed over to QA and they test it and they hand it back to me and I hand it back to them and they hand it back to me and I hand it back to them and they hand it back to me and they hand it back to them and finally it goes to the client, hooray, and 6 months later we do it again. And it just really frustrates me that we are somehow we're back there. I just don't understand it, but oh well.
Okay. Well,
sorry to be such a bummer, Catherine.
Catherine has nothing to say.
like wearable technology and
It's all cool, whatever. I have a Fitbit.
All right. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. So let's quickly go to Q&A. We've spoken a lot, but I think some of our themes may resonate with the audience, or at least I hope they do. And I'm curious if you have any more questions for our distinguished panelists. So we have a mic over here if anybody would like to ask a question. I'm going to go to the mic.
So all of you talked about communications between or among the business part of your organizations and technology. I was wondering, on the security side of things, which we hear a lot about lately, is that a subculture within technology where you have to have some negotiation, mediation to get them speaking the same language? Is it integrated? How are you addressing that?
In BNY Mellon, I'll go first. In BNY Mellon, we have a Chief Information Security Officer. He is a direct report to the corporate CIO. He's one of my peers. And he certainly does bridge the gap. So he's essentially, again, watching the trends. We have all the different types of government agencies we're certainly involved with because of the nature of our business. And he needs to bring that thought leadership to the organization. So he's responsible, well, really ultimately up to the CEO of bringing that. He's setting a strategy. He's setting a roadmap where we need to go as a firm overall. And that's in one case that he really does hold the cards. That goes above everything. I mean, if BNY Mellon had a breach, that would certainly be front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and everything else. So something we take extremely, extremely seriously. And, really that's probably taken care of before anything else. Well, yes, I would say so. Agreed.
I don't think I have anything to add there. It is a totally another language. Yes, I mean in my experience, I don't know. We have to deal with OpenSSL tomorrow, so yay, another breach! Hooray! Yeah.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think I think it is definitely a place where really good dialogue is extremely helpful for everyone because there's often a balance between sort of security policies and usability, right? So we had an app in my old job where you literally had to use 5 passwords to get into it. That was a bit hard to use. It was very secure. It was so secure that even if you had the right to use it, you couldn't get into it yourself. So
Yep.
we were very actively preventing you from seeing your balance, But but I think so. So there's some of that, and then there's I think where we have a good dialogue now is sort of in the trends, right? So when you move your applications to the cloud, that changes the security profile of it. Certainly, the federal government has started very actively, DoD, New York State, and so I think that's where the two dialogues can really help. It's like, okay, we've got this trend in cloud, we've got this trend in mobile wearables. How does that impact the security profile of what we do on a day-to-day basis? And that's where the really meaningful dialogue can come. I don't think the answer is like, don't go to cloud, right? Because that would be sort of the wrong answer in a few years, right? So, so I think it's important to learn each other's language as well. And, the balance, I think, in government especially is innovation is by its nature risky. And kind of the last thing you want your government to do is like be risky, right? So, so that's the balance between the two. It's a huge challenge and it's a delicious challenge. It's like the hardest job and the best job I've ever had.
Did you just say delicious?
Yeah.
Right. I think a good way to summarize it, I like to say this to the security guys, and I like to say this to the lawyers. Don't tell me what I can't do. Mm-hmm. Tell me how I can do it.
Exactly.
Right? And that's an important piece of where they have value, right? By being a facilitator to get us to innovate.
Right. All right. Looks like we have several other questions lined up. Sorry. Ewan says we can take 2 more questions. Okay. So are you going to negotiate for your... Okay.
No, 2?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm Jill Otter from JP Morgan. I was one of the people who raised her hand as the non-techie people, so speak very slowly when you answer my question. What I actually wanted to ask you, anecdotally or with data, is how can we help sell New York City, pitch New York City to me as a tech hub? Tell me, what are the data points or your experiences personally? Because as someone who works in the financial industry, I've always known New York as being the financial capital of the world, and I would love to help in any way make it the tech capital of the world as well.
That's you.
Yeah.
Should I start again?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to go?
Sure. I'll start real quick. So New York City is the number 2 tech hub in the world, trailing only Silicon Valley. We also have the fastest growth rate in terms of dollars and venture capital dollars as well. By some estimates, there are over 300,000 tech jobs currently in New York City. Either they are tech and non-tech jobs in tech companies, or they are tech jobs in non-tech companies. So we just did a study. We'll do one every year on sort of the numbers of that. We represent actually the diversity of technology in a number of different ways. the diversity of the talent pool here is a huge advantage. So we're the most diverse place on the planet. Like, I think it's like Flushing, Queens, where I'm from. And so if you want to have, diversity in your design, by race, age, culture, this is the best place to be. Secondly, by industry. So if you're a tech company, want to be close to your customer in finance, publishing, media, advertising, this is the place to be. For fintech, health tech, ad tech, I don't need to tell you. And I would like to say for GovTech, I think there's an untapped market for technology companies to sell to government. Governments are the single biggest buyer of technology goods and services all over the world. And yet, because of our procurement cycles and everything else that take up to 2 years, we end up paying more for older stuff. So I'm very impassioned about fixing that and getting better technology to governments, because that's technology for everyone. I think that we're going to be #1 soon. And the New York City government is certainly very, very active in growing the tech pipeline. We have an initiative in City Hall, the Tech Talent Pipeline. It's only focused on training more people and getting them into industry. We're investing in the startup and tech economy. We're also investing in New York City school kids, and so that's our goal. And we're New York, so we have to be #1, right?
It's required, I think.
The only thing I add is, even if financial services firm is a technology firm, there is no way we could achieve the scale that we have. And that's part of the shift that we have to make in the perception. One last thing, one last plug. Actually, this is my second speaking engagement today. Today, the first one I was actually in an event for an organization called the Anita Borg Institute, which is the largest network of women in technology. So BNY Mellon is one of 6 firms who has now formed the hub of that. That was an organization that started in Silicon Valley. We've just made a hub in New York, and that's our message. You don't need to go to Silicon Valley to do great technology. It's all here.
I only have 2 pitches for New York as a tech hub. #1, I think New Yorkers are much better business people than Silicon Valley people, in my experience, which might mean that you get really brilliant certain types of, deep tech products out there. But I think that you have so much business savvy in New York City, even and especially in the software development community here, that, I believe in this city as a place that we can produce even better tech companies, because I think we really do have that business savvy here. On the flip side, there's so much to do in New York, and Silicon Valley is so boring that we may not work hard enough. So I don't know. But, if you want to live a really cool place, or you can have a cool life and you can be among a huge diversity of people and industries, I mean, I don't know why anyone wouldn't live here. It's the best city in the world, in my opinion.
Yeah. Woo!
Very true. Very true.
Okay, last question.
So I think I'm Haile Owusu. I'm from the Chief Data Scientist at Masterable. And I was just curious, you mentioned, I think 3 different languages. There was the business language, there was the tech language, and I suppose this not quite mutually intelligible language of data science, right? Mm-hmm. I was curious for you, Catherine, what the vicissitudes of translating between those 3 languages is like, and for the rest of the panelists, what your interaction has been with that 3rd language, data science.
The vicissitudes. Love that word. Well, I mean, I think it is important to recognize that it is kind of a 3rd language. Data scientists speak the language of machine learning and statistics in a way that I think engineers may want to sweep under the rug, and business people, their eyes roll back in their head. I mean, so it really is it really is a separate thing. So I guess in my career at AppNexus, what I have seen work the best, what seems to be most productive, is to try to form some sort of a Creole, if you will, a Creole language. And the way that we aspire to do that is by creating what all the AppNexans in the room have heard me talk about, the trifecta, my famous trifecta of product, who represents the business side or the clients, the engineers and the data scientists. And when you have those three parties working closely together and really meeting on a regular basis and discussing the ideas and all taking ownership over a given project, then they do form a creole. They learn to speak each other's languages and they become a unified whole. So vicissitudes, I mean, the challenges are really just trying to get those three, for me, trying to get them in the same room, talking and aligned on the project, which is a lot harder than it sounds.
Yeah, so I gave a talk at the Strata Barcelona conference. Strata is like a big data conference, and they were like, "Will you give a keynote?" I was like, "Will you fly me to Barcelona?" Sure, why not? That sounds awesome. And I actually wrote this talk, and Catherine actually helped me a little bit write this talk. And the theme of the talk was data and product and tech working together. So it's sort of data analytics, data science analysis, product, the business, the product management team, and technology. And I decided to use the theme of The Wizard of Oz, where the data team is the Cowardly Lion. The tech team is the Tin Man because they have no heart, and the product team is the Scarecrow. So between those three, they each sort of have two strengths and one weakness, right? So what you have to do is you have to figure out what strength you share with each part and communicate through that strength, right? So, the data team tends to move slowly. They want to analyze everything and get statistical significance, and you're just like, "Come, just give me a finger in the wind. Come on, man! Like, is it really gonna be a problem, right?" But they want to move slowly. So the answer to speaking to that, if you're talking to engineers, is to get technical. But if you're talking to the product side, is to actually be talk to the product that you're building, right? A great data person, a great data scientist, a great analyst really actually cares a lot about the business and is able to articulate the business problems in an analytical way. But remember, what you're doing all that analysis for and you're doing all the data science for is the business that you're supporting. So putting that framing of why you're doing this, why you care about these numbers, what are these numbers actually telling me, not just like the graph, here's a cluster here and here's a cluster here. And if you draw a line, then, oh my gosh, magic. It's like, what? What does that mean? No, tell me, explain it to me, tell me the story. That's why, the best data scientists these days are known to be storytellers, because there is a level of you don't want to tell lies. I mean, lies, damn lies, or data science should be the new phrasing a little bit, but you want to use a truthful story. If you tell a truthful story with the statistic that you've created through your analysis, through your data science, you can really capture the hearts and minds of everyone around you, even us heartless engineers.
An amazing metaphor. I'm stealing it.
Please take it.
Either of you want to comment before we close?
I think you guys just have it covered.
Just that was awesome.
It was. I love the metaphor. Great, actually.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you. We've gone a little bit over time. Thank you for your patience and your attention. You can find out all about all the events that we host here at appnexus.com/Razzle Dazzle. And there's food and drink in the cafe directly outside. Please join us and continue the conversation. Thanks so much.